Before I start this review of this novel, I would like to make it clear that there are several triggers that are a part of this novel. This novel is incredibly dark, as it deals with a lot of things that most people are not willing to talk about. Sexual abuse, bulimia, self-harm, depression, alcoholism, psychological issues, mental illnesses. So many things in this novel are so triggering to so many different kinds of people, and before you even pick up this novel, if you decide to after this review, I would like to warn you that it is the heaviest novel I think that I have ever read in my entire life, and it is probably one of the heaviest novels that will ever exist in YA fiction. If you still would like to watch this book review, I hope you enjoy it. But I do not blame you if you decide to go away after this disclaimer. But you have been warned. Kaylee and Rayanne are identical twins, right down to the dimple. Except one has a much darker secret about her life than the other. Kaylee, unfortunately, has been subject to her father's sexual abuse, has been raped and tortured by her own father for several years of her life. Rayanne, however, seeks her father's affection and is jealous of her sister Kaylee for getting all of the attention from him. The novel Identical by Ellen Hopkins is a dark and depressing story about sexual abuse and the emotional, physical, and psychological problems that come along with it. So like I said in the disclaimer, there are so many triggers in this novel because, for one, it talks about something that is not really ever talked about in any novel I have ever seen in my life. This is something that is so dark that most people will shy away from it because it is about something that they do not exactly want to read about. I was talking with a friend earlier today before I recorded this review about this novel, and she was saying that she had done some researching on Goodreads about, what people had said about this after they read it, and she said that she saw a lot of people gave 1 star on Goodreads out of 5 to this novel because it was so dark and heavy and the content was so graphic. And I was shocked to hear this because it is a very dark and heavy novel, but this is about something that people need to understand. I mean, for God's sake, 1 in 3 women, I believe 1 in 5 men, correct me if I'm wrong, but that amount of people are sexually abused at some point in their lifetime. And many times, it is by someone that is either a close family member or a close family friend, or just somebody in general that they are supposed to trust or they believe that they can trust. This is something that people will shy away from because it is something that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about sexual abuse. Nobody wants to talk about rape. Nobody wants to talk about this, something that it is too dark, it is too depressing. It's something nobody wants to talk about. But it makes me really happy to see that somebody actually decided to write about something like this so that we, as people who have not exactly been in that position, can understand how a victim of sexual abuse has felt. Ellen Hopkins writes all of her novels that I have seen, and I'm pretty sure just all of her novels in general, in verse. So the entire novel is in a poetry form, with each poem essentially going in a continuous line, so there is no breaks, there is not really any stopping of this kind of train. The only breaks that really kind of happen are the breaks in perspective from Kaylee to Rayanne or Rayanne to Kaylee. And what's really interesting about that to me is that when the change happens between perspectives, there is a pattern. And the pattern is that the last poem of the perspective that you are currently on will have a certain format, and then, at least in this novel, I'm not sure about her other novels, but the first poem of the next perspective will be almost a mirror image of the structure of that poem, at least, if not exactly the same poem. But the one thing that does stay the same from one poem to the next is a sequence of words in a way that create a coherent sentence. So for example, on this page we have a poem from Kaylee's perspective, and we see that most of the poem is in this fashion on the left-hand side of the page, with certain words picked out to create its own coherent sentence on the right-hand side of the page. Now, on the next page is the beginning of the next poem, which is from Rayanne's perspective, and the words that were picked from Kaylee's perspective are also on Rayanne's perspective, but put on the left-hand side as opposed to the right-hand side. Now, what's really interesting about this is that that sentence that is picked out from the words in this poem have different meanings for each perspective. It means something completely different for Kaylee than it does for Rayanne, which I think is genius because it shows the dynamic and the difference between the two sisters, that although they are identical in every single way, they are so different in their personalities and it is shown in that way through the structure of their poems and the structure of their perspectives in this novel. While this is a very dark and depressing and terrifying experience to read, it is also incredibly beautiful because it makes the reader want to hope and pray and just plead to God or something that there is going to be some kind of light at the end of the tunnel for these twin sisters, because what they go through is something that nobody should ever have to go through in their entire life, but unfortunately it is something that still happens to this day and is probably still going to continue on for the rest of eternity until we can somehow figure out a way to keep people who commit sexual abuse crimes from becoming the monsters that they are. If you're a psychology major or minor and you're looking for ways to help yourself understand what exactly goes on with victims of sexual abuse, this is a great novel for you to be able to get yourself involved with, because this lays out everything that a sexual abuse victim will go through, at least in one particular case, because not every case of sexual abuse is the same. But the feelings, I feel, are very, very similar from case to case as far as what the thought process is, what is the kind of mental state that these people go through. The exact experiences are never the same, and the exact mental, physical, emotional problems are not always the same, but the feelings, I feel like, are really well expressed in this novel to where I think you can get a pretty good idea of what exactly happens when somebody is sexually abused. So overall, this novel was incredibly well written, despite it being so dark and so heavy. Definitely one of my most favorite novels, I would say. It's got to be in my top 5 right now, for sure, after reading this, because there are so many boundaries that are being pushed in this novel that I never thought could have been pushed before. It was really structured amazingly. I really enjoyed the way that Ellen Hopkins writes. I love her books. I love the Crank series. I love Tilt. I read Impulse about this time last year and I loved it. You guys can go check out that book review if you want. That one deals with some really heavy things too. If you don't read this novel and you don't get a sense of dread and terrified nature from this, then you have no heart at all, I would say. And if you think that this content is too scary, you need to take off the rose-colored glasses and actually look at the real world, because this stuff's happening every single day. They're living in a fantasy world if they think that this is too much for them, because this stuff happens in real life, and I'm not going to sit by and let that just be pushed under the rug. There is not going to happen right here and right now. But thank you guys so much for joining me in this book review of Identical by Ellen Hopkins. I do hope you guys enjoyed it, despite me kind of ranting a lot. But if you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And please, if you are ever struggling with something like this, if you know someone who has been sexually abused or is being sexually abused currently and they are not getting help, please, for the love of God, at least make an attempt to get them some help, because they may not want it at the time, but it is something that is going to be able to help them heal. And I'm going to say now, you may not save all of them, but if you make an attempt, it is better to do that than to not try at all and see the person you care about suffer. I was going to add something else to that, but I think I'm just going to end that here. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.